What made you realize the relationship was over? Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy. Thanks. I hated hearing her car pull in the driveway when she got off work. When the things they did didn't make me mad anymore. I just didn't care. At all. So it was easy to walk away. When I realized I was the only one planning our future, and he was just there riding along with whatever I came up with. It felt very lonely and exhausting. I wanted a life partner that could help lead the way and carry the load with me. Easily the night a large group of friends was sitting around a campfire answering the "where do you see yourself in 20 years" question, and most of the answers were the usual ones about kids or lake houses or retirement. My boyfriend of 6 years said he would probably still be trying to find the woman of his dreams, then elaborated on what he was looking for. The whole group was dead quiet and looking from him to me. I did manage to keep my composure long enough to make it to my car. On a happier note, I thought he was great, but since I was with someone, never realized how much he liked me. She told him about what happened the next morning. He called me at 11 o'clock and said he was on his way to take me to lunch. I said I didn't want to go. He showed up anyway, convinced me to go, and we have been together ever since. Had a bunch of extras given. VIP tickets to concerts happening the days leading to the Super Bowl, a Super Bowl experience trip, was supposed to go golfing, VIP tickets to the pre-show and game tickets in a section with unlimited free booze. Then husband was a total asshole the entire time. Refused to do any of the included activities. Only wanted to find craft beer bars to hang out in. At one point got shit-faced and wandered around the hotel in a bathrobe yelling at random people while the head of the Budweiser distributor in my town is sitting down trying to recruit me for a job. The morning of the Super Bowl he decides he doesn't want to go and wants to sell the tickets instead. So I sell the tickets and hand him $14,000 from the sale of the tickets. Have an interesting story about who bought them. 3 days later he is telling me to kill myself because I'm an awful bitch. It was that moment I understood that this person was miserable and there was nothing in the world that could ever make them happy, and I needed to get the fuck out. First session was productive. We were given homework. The second session the counselor asked how we did. When it was discovered she didn't do her homework, the counselor called her out on it. We left her office and she said, "I don't want to do counseling anymore." That was when I knew. My dad that I had known for 21 years. She'd known him for 3 months. We came back for the memorial. I spent all day being a shoulder for my mom and my siblings. I went to the room we were staying in, tired of being a rock and need to break down. She then expected me to comfort her about my dad's death. When I pointed out how drained I was, she said, "I comforted you when you found out. From now on it's your job to comfort me." When our daughter was crying at the service, I had to take her out because she said that it wasn't right to have her walk away from my dad's service. Again, my dad, not hers. I realized I wanted a divorce. I looked up one day and realized I'd spent 5 years trying to help him stop drinking, and he'd spent 5 years finding better ways to hide his drinking from me. Alcoholism is a horrible fucking disease. The words still resonate in my head. Either you move out or I'm moving out. I haven't loved you for the past year. My first thought was, wait, that was all fake. As I thought about all we had done together over the past year, I moved out and she filed and finalized a divorce. 3 months after the divorce was final, she was at my door crying and saying she wanted to get back together because apparently the guy she had been having an affair with wasn't that great after all. Nope, but thanks for ripping all the scabs off my slowing healing wounds from this. Those wee dark days, as we had been together 9 years total and married for 7. Probably when I found pictures of her banging some other dude in our bed while I was out of town for work. When I realized I did not like the person I had become in the relationship. When she told me she didn't love no more. My entire world that day collapsed. I spent 3 weeks sleeping in the hospice waiting for my granddad to die, and they spent it sleeping with my best mate. At least they had the decency to make it clear it was entirely my own fault. 0. When my condoms started missing, we got home from dinner and she already had her bags packed. She told me she hadn't loved me for the last year or so and that she'd be staying at a friend's house. I found out a while later that she was only staying for the cheap rent until she paid off her student debt or credit card bills. When I unexpectedly walked in the house at lunch and I found the other guy balls deep in her. Indifference. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. If one or both partners feel this about the other, it's difficult to come back from. Most people aren't willing to put in the work to do so, and wind up calling it quits. One day we were at a festival and she had disappeared with someone again and I couldn't find her. I was then drinking with a friend and met someone I fell in love with at first sight. That was the sign for me that too much had happened and only disappointment was left. When she threw a drink in my face, walked out of the car at a red light, then told me she hoped in no particular order that my dad, mom, and dog all died, and that there no one to comfort me through it. This happened Saturday. Fuck you, Victoria. Narcissistic piece of garbage. When she started spending more time with her female tattoo artist instead of me, after telling me her tattoo artist actively desired her. The doctor says, "I think you have stomach cancer. I want to scope your stomach at 5 m." I was terrified. I just went home and sat stunned on the couch with the dogs for hours until she got home from work. She gets home. I ask her to sit down. I tell her what the doctor said. I tell her that I'll need her to take off work the next day because I won't be able to drive afterwards and I need her to drive me. But I don't want to miss work, she says. That's the exact moment I knew our marriage was over. She then apologized and went on to try and rekindle our relationship. Her and I dated for 3 years. I cried on my assistant manager's shoulder that night and she took me to drink after. I've been calling her my big sister ever since. That had crushed my world, and in an instant I completely fell out of love with her. I'm no Georgia Peach by any means and share blame for the argument, so I'm not here throwing blame on just her. That wouldn't be fair. But at that point I knew she didn't love me that much anymore. That was just last thing that needed to be said to know it's slowly unraveling. It's scary to me because I'm usually a softie and can't stand feeling like we're in trouble. But we are, and there isn't a feeling in me I need to change it. I just flat out don't really care. Is that bad? After 5 years she told me I need to come home right away, and she already had a bag packed. Told me after all that time we're fundamentally different and she's not happy and her friends didn't think she was happy. Came back and moved all her stuff out when I was gone, then never heard from her again. Kind of cold how you go from sleeping with someone every single night for that long, then a flip of a switch and zero communication. When she refused to even think about a compromise during any disagreement. She told me she's the bitch I signed up for and it's my job to just deal with it, then started belittling me for spending time with my friends. Good riddance, bitch. One kept talking about their ex like 2 months and so I ended it. Tried convincing me they are over their ex, and were even breaking down on the floor screaming when I was leaving, which creeped me out, so I never contacted them again. She died. The classic cod before girlfriend experience. I didn't get to just talk to him for over a month, closer to 2, despite the fact that we went to the same church and were therefore in the same building every week. I got tired of my relationship amounting to a passing high as he rushed off somewhere else or left to go play video games. He wasn't willing to change his behavior. Funnily enough, he tried to propose over the phone not long after I broke up with him. You? Probably when the phrase "fuck you" and "fuck your parents" left her mouth. Getting home from work and seeing that the apartment had been cleaned out. She was nice enough to leave my clothes, most items that were mine before we met, and some basics. Our social activities only involved her friends. She would make an excuse why she couldn't come to the group activities that my friends and I were going to do. She wouldn't come meet a very good friend of mine from the military who was in town for brunch, but wanted me to bring food home to her. Also inviting ex-boyfriends to holiday meals. Our time together was beginning to be less and less as she would invite a third-wheel friend to plan dates because so-and-so had a bad day. When my ex would state 10 seconds into every argument, which became more frequent, that maybe we don't belong together. I think it was her way of guilting me into ending the argument and switching to comforting, assuring her. But one time she said it and I was just like, well, maybe you're right. And #X200B. I knew right then that we were done. There was no walking that back, and I felt so much relief. When she told me she didn't believe in me or me achieving any of my goals as she dumped me on Valentine's Day. When she told me that my presence was triggering to her, when I completely shut down emotionally. I haven't felt anything for a long time. When I was cheated on, it was pretty obviously the end. Homie, don't play that. Platonically speaking, when my friends never initiated plans. I'd always be the one to reach out, so when I stopped, we kind of just stopped talking. It's been a few years now with some of them. I miss them, but having that one-sided of a friendship is exhausting and unfair. Avoiding me, ignoring texts, and blowing off dates. He did me a favor though, lol. An excellent counselor told me, do you know what's worse than coming home to an empty house? Coming home to a house that's more empty because of the person waiting there. Many things looking back over the years that I took on the chin and kept trying. But once I lost count of how many times she used "I want a divorce," separation as a comeback in a fight. 9 years down the drain, what a waste. I'm not okay, but I'm doing everything I can. Kept telling me how useless and pointless I was and that I had just made a bad investment by falling in love with her. This was after she had squandered the money I lent her trying to save her business. When someone admits that they were using you and your feelings for them to their own advantage, then it hurts. Really fucking hurts. The betrayal of trust. When she said she didn't want to be in the relationship anymore, like 3 days after she had made plans months out. When my grandfather died, she told me she doesn't care. That was the 5th and the last year of our marriage. When I realized I wasn't crazy, he gaslighted me into believing I was the problem that needed to be fixed. I asked her, "Do you still want to be together?" and she answered it. Cut her off right there. I've asked my now wife this same question before and she has always answered yes, of course, even when she's mad, so I knew she was the right one. When I proposed and she said no. When I heard her having sex with another guy while I was getting ready for work. I moved out that same week. I deployed to Iraq and my first paycheck with extra pay hit our account about 2 weeks later. He turned around and spent $250 on cigars. He was unemployed on purpose and we had no children, but because of him, we were broke AF. I canceled his card, took over the account, paid all bills, and filed for divorce after I got back. When I found out he was already in a relationship with a different girl before he even met me, yet still approached me and started a relationship with me, and continued to date her while dating me the entire time we were together. When I looked down at my newborn baby and finally realized what real love feels like. When she told me to stop trying to control her for asking her to stop drinking and driving. She had a car accident a few hours later and almost died. I don't care if you're irresponsible with your own life, but when you drink and drive you put others at risk, and the fact a 24-year-old had to be told not to do that was shocking. When she started hanging out with another guy and only asked me to hang out for rides, she died. When I looked at him and felt nothing. You ever have sex with someone you don't love anymore? I have. It should feel like an awesome, fulfilling moment of love, empathy, and passion. And the last time it was a fucking chore. When I woke up, the letter where she said she was engaged to someone else was kind of a clue. When he constantly hit, smacked, kicked, and tried to kill me. TL, doctor, when I asked, "Do you even still want a relationship?" And he said, "I don't know." Hit it off really well with someone I met at an event. We exchanged numbers, flirted, and texted a lot, and called each other on lunch breaks. He lived a 3-hour drive from me. Not ideal, but doable. The following weekend, I drove down to visit him for the weekend and we had a great time. He took me to his favorite local park and showed me his Polaroid collection. At night we cuddled, and while he was at work I got to visit some friends who were in the area. The day after I drove home, suddenly trying to talk to him was like pulling teeth. From then on, he would respond to maybe 1 out of every 5 of my texts, couldn't take phone calls, and all the while posted to his Snapchat story when he was out with friends. The one time we did talk on the phone, he insisted he was still interested in me and was just having a rough time at work with life, but wouldn't open up to me with any details. A few weeks into this I was starting to feel crazy. The memory of one good week is hardly a foundation for a relationship, and while he never said it outright, I always felt like I was bothering him any time I reached out. Finally, I asked if there was any kind of compromise we could work out, and suggested we could pick just one day of the week where we try to set aside time for a phone call. Turns out I had bad timing. I texted him the same day that he got some bad news, and he told me he needed space. At that point I was feeling really hurt and confused, but also felt like I was being selfish for feeling that way when he was dealing with so much stress in his life. I finally reached my limit after another couple weeks and sent him a text explaining that I couldn't keep this up, and that if he still wanted a relationship then something needed to change, or else I was going to end it, and tried to move on. He took 3 days to respond with a very non-committal paragraph that essentially boiled down to "I don't know." I told him it was over, unfollowed him on everything, and tried to move past it. It feels embarrassing in retrospect. This guy was really shitty to me, and I not only held on for that long but was also hung up on it for months after. I think the lack of closure was what really got to me. There was some part of me that thought maybe someday his life would settle down a bit and we could rekindle in the future, but then COVID happened and I eventually moved on. To this day I still don't know how he felt about me that whole time, whether he was secretly annoyed, turned off by me, or if he genuinely did want a relationship and was just overwhelmed by other things in his life. But since he never communicated any of it, I guess it doesn't matter. He avoided me for over a month after horribly fubbing our 1-year anniversary. All I wanted was to spend it with him, nothing else. I didn't even ask him to take it off or plan anything. That night he let me come all the way to the bar where he worked, to tell me he didn't feel up to hanging out, after which I fled hurt, and in tears. Crying in public is the literal worst. He ended up coming over to apologize, and I spent the night comforting and taking care of him, only for him to avoid me for nearly a month after. We were supposed to be planning a camping trip together that I had asked him on months prior. I couldn't get him to commit, then he said he would come, then changed his mind a week later. We ended up breaking up the day before I left on the trip, so I went solo, and it was amazing. 10/10 would recommend doing something really nice that affirms your independence after a tough breakup. We broke up in August, but he was probably done with me in May and didn't have the courage or emotional maturity to end it sooner. I had a feeling he was going to break up with me when he asked to talk at my place after a month of canceling plans. When I opened the front door to let him in, I was certain beyond a doubt. But looking back, there were signs he was losing interest in me. He used to initiate time together, but towards the end I was the only one making an effort. He didn't introduce me to his friends or family, didn't engage much with mine when I invited him to meet them. I just wish he hadn't wasted so much of my time. Or perhaps it's that I wish I didn't let him waste so much of it. He broke my trust badly about 3 months in, and in hindsight I should have ended it myself right then and there. I've taken a break from dating and worked to actively unpack my dating patterns, so hopefully I won't find myself in such a lousy situation with someone so undeserving again. I will say he's not a completely awful human, and he did give me closure. The breakup was long and emotional, but I am proud of myself for being honest but not deliberately petty or spiteful. I'm struggling a bit right now with some bitterness, but time and distance will take care of that since those feelings are not normally in my nature. I'm moving away here soon, after I finish my master's, and once I'm gone he will be just another big fish in a small pond. In the meantime, I am focusing my time and energy on all of my incredible friends I will soon be leaving, who actually love me. To those in this thread who are still in the thick of it and hurting, remember you won't always feel this way. Don't repress the feels, but know that you'll come through to the other side. Sending much love and kindness. When I met the love of my life, and the way they treated me made me realize I had never been in love with him. I just dated him because I felt expected to. Now I'm with the love of my life and am so much happier. When he decided his work away from home was more important than his kids and then found out he was cheating with a girl on his crew. We got engaged in April, and a few days later we went to the church to get a date to get married. She's picked a day in October. That was the last time I heard her say anything about the wedding. I wasn't too concerned because I figured her and her family were on it. Then in July she came and said she wanted to break up. It hurt like hell at the time, but now I'm thankful she decided to leave before the wedding than after it. When I started to realize just how toxic to everyone around me I was starting to become, and started to see how she truly was as a person. Seeing a lot of my wife on here. I would audibly groan when they texted, called, snapped me. She said, "You never care about anyone, that's why no one, I repeat, no one loves you." Me too. My heart dropped for a second. I caught him lying. Again. I wished for years he'd never come into my life, but he kept saying he'd kill himself without me, so I felt this morbid sense of obligation. But through a good bit of therapy I realized that I can't stay in a relationship that constantly hurts me to keep him alive. And so when I caught him in yet another stupid fucking lie, I told him we were done. This will come as a surprise to no one, but he's still alive. Despite his threats, he didn't kill himself. He is, however, blocked, and while I do occasionally hear gossip about him from friends of friends, his problems and his lies are no longer my problems. It started when I realized that I was Team Us. She was Team herself. I did things to make our lives better. She only did things for herself. But the bottom of the rabbit hole was when I realized that she only cared whether I was alive or dead to the degree that someone was paying the bills. Aside from that, she had zero investment in me. When you realize that you mean pretty much nothing to the woman you love and would do anything for, it's hard not to take that personally. Could you get me some ice chips? Mind you, I had not been out of bed or eating, drinking, much less awake. He said, stone-faced, get them yourself. Not at that moment, but when I processed it later, I knew I could not grow old and be vulnerable with him. Years later, his excuse was that he had just been on the phone with his mother when I got the papers for legal separation. She honestly thought I'd pay for her living experiences while she went off and banged whomever she pleased.